Good afternoon. I'd like to call our meeting to order of the Governance Committee of Council. It's May 15th, 2025. I'm Councillor Debbie Sharma, Chair of this committee and Speaker of Council. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. We do have minutes, or before that, I'd like to make introductions, of course, of the committee. We have Councillor Sean Dobson, Councillor Matt Allard, our City Clerk, Mr. Carlos Camero, and our Deputy City Clerk, Mr. Andrew Poitras. We have minutes from the last meeting.
So moved.
Okay. Councillor Dobson moves the minutes of the March 11th meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Contrary? That's carried. We have two items on the agenda today. And I'd like to call forward our Integrity Commissioner to join us, Ms. Sherry Walsh, and her junior associate, Mr. Connor Johnson. First item is the annual report of the Integrity Commissioner for the period of January 1st, 2024 to December 31st, 2024. The report is published on the agenda today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us. So, it is my pleasure to present my annual report for the period January 1 to December 31, 2024. I'm going to read my message to you and then I'll walk you through the highlights of the report because I know that you've all seen it and that it is published on the agenda. And I'm happy to take questions as I go through. You can interrupt me, ask questions as they occur to you. So it's been 7 years since Winnipeg City Council first established a formal ethics and accountability framework to govern the conduct of its 16 members when they perform their duties of office. And this framework includes a code of conduct, which translates high-level principles into a set of practical rules, the code, and an integrity commissioner who performs the dual role of providing advice to council members about how to comply with their obligations under the code, and also provides objective scrutiny as to whether members have met those obligations. And in this report, I described the work my office carried out in 2024, which included providing advice to members about how to comply with the code, receiving and assessing complaints which alleged that a member had breached the code, conducting investigations of complaints, recommending amendments to the code, and engaging with members of the public about the expectations that are required of members under the code. And I always like to refer back to the fact that the preamble to the code says that a written code of conduct demonstrates that members of council share a common understanding of the ethical obligations which are essential to the fair and effective operation of government. And so by setting out specific rules of conduct and a complaint mechanism for enforcing those rules, the code allows members to perform their duties of office in an ethical, consistent, and transparent manner, ensuring that they put the public's interest before their own. And as we know, as this council well knows, promoting a culture of ethical behavior does not happen by accident, nor is it something which can be set in stone. And to be effective, an ethics framework must be capable of adapting to stay current with evolving societal and technological challenges. And in keeping with this requirement, one of the most significant tasks my office completed in 2024 was to review and recommend updates to the code. It was a process that actually began at the end of 2023. And this work involved engaging primarily with members of this committee, followed by engaging with members of the Executive Policy Committee and then Council as a whole. And it culminated in Council passing an updated version of the code on November 21, 2024. The changes which were made to the code are intended to strengthen its efficacy while still maintaining all of the substantive ethical obligations which have been in place since Council first passed that code in 2018. As Integrity Commissioner, I take a proactive approach to promoting a culture of ethical conduct, focusing on education and advice. And that's why, for example, when I dismiss a complaint that has been made about a member's conduct, I still give the member a copy of the complaint and a copy of my dismissal letter that I sent to the complainant so that the member is aware of the nature of the complaint that's been made about them and can see how I applied the code to a given set of facts. I can say that in all my dealings with members during the period covered by this report, I found them to be respectful and fully cooperative with my office. And based on those dealings, I am pleased to report that in the 7 years since I first started in this role, members have developed a greater understanding of how to perform their duties of office in a way that complies with the ethical obligations which are essential to the fair and effective operation of government. So I start with talking about the advisory aspect of my role, which I always say is, in my view, the most important aspect of this role, consistent with being able to provide proactive advice and promote a culture of ethical conduct. In 2024, I received 21 requests from members who sought my advice on a variety of topics, including issues relating to their ability to accept a gift, their use of influence, their ability to fundraise, and whether they needed to recuse themselves from participating in a given matter because of a conflict of interest. I responded to each request within 24 to 48 hours. My advice was provided by phone, in writing, in person, or by video conference. And as has been my practice, in this report, I include anonymized examples of some of the inquiries that I received from members and the advice that I provided in response. So this report sets out 7 examples of advice that I provided to members in response to specific questions. And it also provides advice that I sent out to in an email to all members of council, which just reminded them on the process they need to follow if they believe they have a conflict and need to recuse themselves. And I wanted to make sure that all members were aware of the process they needed to follow. And so I have been told by members of this committee and by your colleagues that the ability to read these examples of the types of requests for advice and the advice that I provided is very helpful in terms of guiding their conduct and complying with the code. And the reason that I provide it on an anonymous basis is because the ability to seek advice from me on a confidential basis is not only set out in the code, but it's a key aspect of the ability to provide advice. So then I deal with complaints. And here I've fast forwarded to page 15 of the report if you're following along. Before page 15, I set out the general process for submitting a complaint. And complaints can be provided to me informally or formally. And the code deals with how those are dealt with. I will only consider investigating a complaint that has been submitted to me formally, that is using the actual form that is found on the website that an individual has to fill out and sign. There's no fee for submitting a complaint, though. So in 2024, I received a total of 25 complaints. 14 of them were formal and 11 were informal. And then in the report, I set out how I dealt with them. Of the 14 formal complaints, 1 was clearly on its face outside my jurisdiction, and I dismissed it summarily. 5 were dismissed on the basis that there were no grounds for conducting an investigation, and that would be an example of where I would send a dismissal letter to the complainant and send a copy of that to the member who was the subject of the complaint. I dismissed another complaint because the conduct, which was the subject of the allegations, was activity about which the member had previously sought and relied on my advice on a proactive basis. And this is a very, I think, a very good feature of the code, again, encouraging members to seek my advice on a proactive basis, because the code says that any written advice that I give to a member will bind me in my subsequent consideration of their conduct if it's complained about, so long as the member followed my advice and so long as the facts that they set out for me were consistent with what happened. And so the ability to seek advice on a proactive basis and obtain written advice can be very helpful to a counselor should they be the subject of a complaint. So I dismissed that complaint on that basis. 6 of the formal complaints I received related to the same incident, and they were resolved informally when the member, on their own initiative, publicly apologized for their conduct. 1 complaint was accepted for investigation, which will be completed this year in 2025. I also point out that there were complaints that were addressed in 2024 by an acting integrity commissioner. In the annual report for the period ending December 31, 2023, I reported that 4 of the formal complaints I received that year arose out of litigation where it was a matter of public record. Lawyers in the firm of which I was at that time a member had acted for one of the parties, and I therefore retained the services of the Integrity Commissioner for the City of Edmonton to address those complaints. I indicated that I had no involvement with how each of those matters would be resolved, other than to say that once the acting Integrity Commissioner had dealt with the complaints, they would advise me of the outcome so I could report on them in my annual report. And so with respect to those complaints, I was advised by the acting Integrity Commissioner that in 2024, one complaint was dismissed by her on the ground that there was insufficient evidence to warrant conducting an investigation. One resulted in an investigation which found that the member had breached the code. The investigation report for that matter was published on the agenda for Council's meeting of November 21, 2024. Council did not complete its deliberations with respect to that report until January of 2025, and so the ultimate deliberations will be covered in next year's report. And the two remaining complaints are being kept in abeyance, I'm advised, pending the outcome of related investigation. In 2024, I also completed work on 6 complaints which were outstanding at the end of the previous year. 2 of those complaints involved investigations, which I completed in 2024. Following the preliminary assessment of the other 4 complaints, I determined that an investigation was not warranted, and I sent dismissal letters explaining my decision to each of the respective complainants before the end of 2024. So in terms of investigations, as I said, I did complete the investigation of 2 complaints that had come forward in 2023. One of them resulted in a determination that the member's conduct had not contravened the code, and the other resulted in a determination that the member had breached the code. Now, the code says that where the Integrity Commissioner decides that after an investigation, the code has not been breached, they don't report publicly about the matter except in an anonymous way in their annual report. And so in this report, I talk about that investigation, and without identifying who the parties were, I talk about what it involved and why I determined that there was no breach. With respect to the investigation report where I did find that a member had breached the code, Council will remember that that matter was addressed. In 2024, Council received the investigation report on June 27, 2024, and Council accepted my recommendation that the member be required to issue a public apology, which they did at that meeting. Now, in this role, as I said, I also have the opportunity to engage with members of the public other than receiving complaints from them. And I was contacted on 17 occasions by members of the public who sought information about a variety of topics relating to the role of the Integrity Commissioner or the code. Many of the communications came from people who had watched council or committee meetings and had general questions about how the code operated. And I always make it clear that I will never give a general opinion about a hypothetical matter or even a specific matter. If an individual, whether a member of the public, member of staff, or a member of council has a concern, they can bring it forward to me either by way of an informal complaint or a formal complaint, and I will address it that way. But I am always happy to discuss in general what the provisions of the code require and how they've been interpreted. Then as part of my mandate to educate, I make a range of information available on the Integrity Commissioner's page on the city's website. And I confirm that although the city manages the technological aspects of that page, all of the content is controlled solely by me. And among other things, I wanted to note that I posted an updated, annotated version of the code, which is available on the website. And I want to express my thanks to Kate McMillan in the clerk's office. She's still in the clerk's office, yes, for her gracious assistance with all matters relating to the code. She usually has them accomplished before I've hit send on my initial request. So then, as I said, one of the major accomplishments I can point to this year was achieving amendments to the code. Since the code was first passed in 2018, we have amended it. As I said, it needs to be a living, breathing document to respond to changes that come up in how it's applied in society. The changes that were made to the code and the reason for doing so are detailed in the report that I submitted to council. It's report number 7. It's on the website. And I wanted to take this opportunity to thank members of this committee in particular for your diligence and commitment in working with me on the task over the past year. We had many lively discussions, and I very much appreciated the engagement and the hard work of this committee. So thank you for that. And the majority of the changes that were made to the code, I think, make it clearer, easier to comply with. Some of them change certain definitions. They have requirements, more specific requirements surrounding confidentiality and relating to the integrity of the investigation process. I want to make it clear, though, that none of the amendments changed any of the substantial or substantive ethical obligations to which members are required to adhere. I guess the only exception to that is we did remove the rule number 10 that says that council members have to comply with all city bylaws, rules, policies. And the reason that I recommended, and I think you agreed to remove that is because, well, it's true that as council members, you have to comply with all those things. I don't feel that it's appropriate for me as the integrity commissioner to regulate every other aspect of your conduct. I'm just here to receive complaints and give advice about your compliance with the code. So that's why we took that rule out. But otherwise, all of the substantive obligations are still there. In terms of other matters, in the last year, I had the opportunity to engage with members of the public service, and the clerk will remember that you attended a meeting that we had with directors of legal services and information services to discuss how the city addresses requests under the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act when somebody asks for a copy of communications between the Integrity Commissioner and members of council. And it was confirmed that the city views those looking at that, interpreting that act as being exempt from the act. And that's important. I'm glad to hear that because, again, as I've said, the ability to be able to engage with me on a confidential basis is, I think, key to members coming forward and seeking my advice on a proactive basis. And that is something that, although I understand that this is the position that the city takes, I would like to pursue with legal services in terms of seeking more specific legislative provisions from the province to confirm that there is that confidentiality in place between communications or covering communications between council members and the Integrity Commissioner. So that is something that I'm going to be working with legal services and then this committee and council going forward. I outline presentations that I made to post-secondary institutions, including one in Ontario, in Toronto, and one to the third-year students at the University of Manitoba's Faculty of Law. I continue to engage with my colleagues, my counterparts from other jurisdictions, and in November, I participated in a virtual conference of Integrity Commissioners for Western Canada to discuss a number of issues relating to our work. And throughout the reporting period, as I always do, I engaged in regular dialogue and consultation with municipal integrity and ethics commissioners from jurisdictions across the country. And through this network, I continue to hear that the provisions of Winnipeg's code and its related practices are often looked to with approval by municipalities and ethics professionals in other jurisdictions. In terms of the budget, as always, I outline how the budget was spent. For the period covered by this report, Council established a budget for my office of $120,000. This, in terms of fiscal responsibility, this represented a $5,000 reduction from the budget which was in place in previous years, and I understand was prompted by a request that the clerk's office looked to make cuts for all of its budgets, and so I appreciate that. The expenditure for this reporting period in any event from my office was under the maximum amount. It was $111,141.50. And that represents 488 hours of professional service, whether from me or one of my colleagues such as Mr. Johnson. And it includes the services which were provided by the Acting Integrity Commissioner in 2024, which were provided at the same hourly rate that is provided to me. I also refer to the Voluntary Lobbyist Registry, and I set out, as I always do, a reminder about what that registry involves and why it's important and why lobbying is an important and legitimate aspect of public life. So I provide information about it and the history of registrations since the registry was first established in April of 2017. I note that the trend appears that the number of individuals who are registering their activity on this registry, which is still voluntary, has decreased over the years. So in 2017, there were 29 registrants, and in this past year, there were only 5 registrants. So I always encourage council members and members of the public service to remind individuals with whom they're meeting outside of a public process to register. It's not a bad thing, and that kind of transparency is very much to be promoted. And I'm always available. My mandate is to serve as registrar for this, or to have oversight over this voluntary registry, and so I'm always available to provide advice or discussions. So to conclude, I started this report by talking about the commitment which the members of Winnipeg City Council have made to maintain high ethical standards in public life. And that commitment is reflected in the ongoing engagement with the work of my office, as I've described in this report. And I note that enforcing and upholding ethical standards requires vigilance, not only from members of council, but also from members of the public and the public service. And so I want to thank all of the individuals, members of council, the public service, and the public who engaged with my office during the last year. And finally, I want to thank the city clerk, Carlos Gamero, and the deputy city clerk, Andrew Poitras, and their staff for the generous assistance that they give me throughout the year. I'm very grateful for the relationship of trust and respect that has developed between our offices over the years. And that concludes my presentation on this report.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Walsh. Very detailed report as always, and we appreciate you being here present with us to put it on the public record. When the public reach out to you, can you just elaborate a little bit or talk about it? There must be, they have a concern, they reach out to you. There's probably a bit of an education piece sometimes on the role of the Integrity Commissioner and the nature of their complaint. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So yes, they will have questions. They'll say, you know, often it is asking about a specific matter that they've witnessed during a council meeting. And so, as I said, I will not give them specific advice or commentary about something that could become the subject of a complaint. I'm not going to give a predetermined off-the-cuff ruling. It wouldn't be appropriate. But I will tell them, generally what the code allows or doesn't allow. If it's a concern raised about how a member of council has spoken to someone who is making a delegation, I will tell them what the code requires and how, the code says that, matters, for instance, that have been dealt with by the speaker, I will typically not engage in if I receive a complaint. So it's often that kind of question that comes to me. And I appreciate that members of the public are taking an active interest in how the code works. Or they'll ask me about areas that simply are not covered by the code, sort of general things that really relate more to decisions that the city has to make.
Thank you. The lobbyist registry was started, I think, in 2018.
It was established in April of 2017. And was intended, I understand, it was originally intended to be a mandatory registry, and then there was some discussion, and it was determined that it would be a voluntary registry, and it would be called, therefore, a voluntary registry.
Well, it's good to see that some still are registering.
Yes, and all of those registrations are on the website. So, you can see exactly who's meeting with whom. And it's, as I said, sometimes I think in sort of general conversation, people think like, oh, lobbying is some kind of, it describes some improper activity. And there's nothing improper about it at all. It's to be encouraged, but it needs to be done in a transparent way.
That's right. Just documenting, exactly. Any further questions or comments? It's a very thorough, detailed report. I know the committee's looked it over.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, thank you. We'll have you stay because we have another item. In the meantime, Councillor Lard, if you could take the chair, and I would like to move the report.
Okay.
Okay, I will move the report, and I want to thank Ms. Walsh for her detailed summary and all her work year round. She's very accessible to council, and we do appreciate that, your continued service in this role. You've been our first integrity commissioner, and your work is just outstanding. And I know I speak for council when I say that.
Okay. So moved by.
I still want to put a few more things through.
Oh,
These new
apologies.
goals here.
Yeah.
And it's your proactive approach to promoting ethical conduct. We see that and we appreciate that. The annual report in front of us is reporting on the previous year and responding to investigating complaints, proposing amendments to the members of council code of conduct, and providing guidance and advice to members of council. We heard in 2024, I want to put this on the record, Ms. Walsh received 21 requests from members of council seeking advice on a range of topics. That's a very good thing because it shows us that council members are contacting you to seek advice on a variety of topics. And do appreciate the timeline that you sort of set for yourself to get back to councillors quickly. It's usually within a 1 to 2 day time frame. And the report includes several examples of the advice provided throughout the year. Councillors are often watching these meetings or they'll go back and watch them at a later time. So I want to thank my council colleagues for reaching out to the Integrity Commissioner, reminding them that the office is available for advice year round, and do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you once again, Ms. Walsh, to you and your team for your work.
Thank you.
Councillor Lard, with that, ask that you have a question on the report.
Yes. So Councillor Sharma moves the report. All in favor?
Aye.
Contrary? Carried. Give the chair back to Councillor Sharma.
Thank you. The next item 2, fundraising review, members of council code of conduct, bylaw 19 of 2018. This is something we've had on the agenda. I don't see the report ready today. We require a little bit more time. Ms. Walsh, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, Councillor Dobson, did you have a question?
No, I was gonna put a motion for an extension, but I'll wait.
Okay. Well, I would very much appreciate an extension. This is an issue, I have been discussing it, the topic informally with members of council in individual meetings that I've had with them. And it is an area that has come before council in the past. We simply didn't have an opportunity to fully address it in this year. I discussed with the clerk's office as well, and I think even with your office, Councillor Sharma, that the timing of when we should be working on this. And I'm happy to now have a plan to bring forward a presentation for council to consider that will get us started on drafting a policy. In the past, the conclusions that I drew after working with members back in 2019 about whether we would have a policy, we looked at what was available or existed in other jurisdictions, and it was really broad, from having some jurisdictions had policies with respect to fundraising, some jurisdictions had absolutely no written guidance. And that did lead us in 2019 to include a new rule in the code relating to fundraising, but it's very broadly stipulated, and that was done intentionally because we determined that the factual circumstances that would give rise to fundraising activities were so varied that it was not possible to codify them specifically, other than to say that council members should not engage in fundraising activity in such a way as to misuse their influence. But I think that now, with council having worked with the code and with my office for a number of years since 2019, I think we're able to make a meaningful policy that will be helpful to both members of council and the public. And so I'm looking forward to working with council and together with my colleague, Mr. Johnson, and to bringing forward ultimately a policy to be considered.
Thank you, Ms. Walsh. I don't see any issue with that timeline.
Thank you.
Appreciate the detailed summary. Councillor Dobson, you're going to move an extension?
Yes, I'd like to move an extension of up to 100 days or 180 days, pardon me.
And that'll take us essentially, Mr. Clerk, to the end of the year.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. We will definitely be able to comply with that
Email
timeline.
and days, every day matters around here, 180 days.
180
Take us
days.
to the end of
180.
December. Thank you for that. All in favor?
Aye.
Contrary, that's carried. No new business today? No new business. Thank you for your presentations and for being with us. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.